Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. And it's time to see what's making the headlines with Pippa Crerar, political editor at The Guardian, and Harry Cole, political editor at The Sun. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. We'll be speaking to them in just a sec. But let's have a look first at what's on some of those front pages. All-out war, that's how the Metro describes what it calls the vicious verbal blows being traded between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson over the former Prime Minister's resignation honours list. The Times says that the Commons Privileges Committee has concluded that Mr Johnson did mislead Parliament when he told MPs he'd been advised that he did not break COVID-19 rules. In the midst of all this, the Mirror speaks up for the families of people who died from COVID and says they deserve better. And although Boris Johnson has now resigned as an MP, he tells the Express in an exclusive interview, "Believe me, I shall return to frontline politics." The Mail says Labour stands accused of abandoning the law-abiding majority by failing to back curbs on disruptive eco-protest groups such as Just Stop Oil. The Guardian, Pippa's paper, leads with news of a woman who was jailed for procuring drugs for an abortion after the legal time limit had passed. The Eye reports what it calls a Russian intelligence agent is now living in the UK with his family, having been housed under the government scheme to help homeless Ukrainian families. The Financial Times says a committee of MPs is to question top officials at the Financial Conduct Authority over sexual misconduct allegations made against hedge fund manager Crispin Odey. Harry's paper, The Sun, focuses on the aftermath of Manchester City's treble-winning celebrations, showing Kyle Walker helping a somewhat worse-for-wear Jack Grealish, and the headline, "Having Treble Jack." And The Star has news of what it says was a UFO crash in the 1930s that was hushed up by the then Pope, according to a former US Air Force official. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we're joined tonight by Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. Let's get started, shall we? Great to have you both with us. Thanks so much for joining us. We're kicking off with the front page of the Daily Express, that exclusive interview that Boris Johnson has given to the Express, where he says, "Believe me, I shall return to frontline politics." I saw you give a little laugh at that, Harry. What's your response? Tell us more about this.
I'm not sure if it's, with all due respect to our friends at the Express, I'm not sure if it's an interview and more of a text message. It seems to be a very short single quote from Boris Johnson, something we've heard from him before. When he resigned, of course, as PM, he said, "Hasta la vista, baby, I'll be back." And obviously in his 1,000-word statement late on Friday night, he, right at the end there, ducked in there a little reference to I'm leaving Parliament for now. Look, Boris Johnson, I think, almost likes the idea of the comeback more than it's ever going to happen. It's a very odd way of staging a sort of coup against Rishi Sunak, as some people have alleged he's doing, by exiting the stage. So it's all sort of fighting talk, I think. And today we've seen astonishing barbs traded in public between a prime minister and their predecessor, or an ex-prime minister and their successor. Rishi Sunak has kept his powder dry over the weekend. He was away in Washington until Friday. We all flew back from DC, and the sort of Boris news blew up late on Friday night. The prime minister didn't respond to any of the barbs from Johnson over the weekend, but my gosh, did he save up his punch. And Rishi Sunak's was seen as a bit of a technocrat, quite a mild-mannered, polite man, but you could tell he was very angry. And I can't remember a time that a prime minister has gone so hard after their predecessor. Even the days of Gordon and Tony and Thatcher and Heath, these sort of things take years to bubble over. But what we've got is the two big beasts of the Conservative Party trading public blows 12 months away from an election. And you just think, what does the public make of this? It is an astonishing turn of events.
Yeah, Pip, I can see you nodding there, and certainly it's extraordinary, isn't it? As Harry says, we've seen these big political feuds before, but it's so rare to see this public mudslinging. And inside the Times, they go into more detail about some of, what Boris Johnson supposedly pressed Rishi Sunak on.
Yeah, the Times has this. Well, we know that Boris Johnson wanted to give his father, Stanley Johnson, a knighthood, and there was a story several weeks ago about it being blocked. Obviously, there's a distinction between the peerages that Boris Johnson put on his list. He wanted 16 of those, and the committee that goes through all of these things for the House of Lords blocked half of them. And then on the other hand, the sort of all the other honours, so the knighthoods and the CBEs and MBs and so on, which went through the Cabinet Office for vetting. And the Times suggestion is that in the recent discussion, I think it was beginning of last week, when Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson sat down and tried to thrash out some sort of compromise on this, that Boris Johnson had actually pressed Sunak again for his father to be awarded a knighthood, citing the example of previous prime ministers that had given family members gongs. Theresa May, obviously her husband Philip, received one, and other prime ministerial spouses have in the past. Not as far as I know, prime ministerial parent, although Stanley Johnson was, of course, an MEP for some time and an environmentalist, but is nevertheless a quite controversial figure, not least in his attitude and some of his behaviour towards women. So this is really just one example of where the row between them erupted. And Boris Johnson is obviously feeling very hard done by that Rishi Sunak did not intervene on his behalf and delay the vetting system, so that the MPs that he wanted to make peers could stay in their seats for now, but still have a sort of a smooth transition, if you like, to the House of Lords ahead of the election. But as Harry's already said, really bad blood between the two men this evening. And that sort of conservative blue on blue infighting. The one thing the public hates more than anything is divided parties fighting amongst themselves, and because it looks like they're just focused on their own futures and their own selves, and not on all the many issues facing the country, like the cost of living crisis, the NHS.
Yeah, and Harry, certainly the front page of the Metro calls it all-out war. What do you make of this, public falling out that we're now seeing play out? Do you think that Boris Johnson is going to pose more problems for Rishi Sunak outside of Parliament or inside?
Well, he's resigned formally as an MP today. He is no longer an MP officially, and he's upended Downing Street's week quite spectacularly once this week, and I wonder whether he'll do it again. Look, he's clearly aggrieved. He feels that he was misled, perhaps not directly, perhaps he wasn't told a lie to his face, but misled by what Rishi Sunak didn't tell him. They clearly met 10 days ago in Parliament. They had secret peace talks, as the Times report and the Sunday Times reported earlier on Sunday. They discussed peerages, they discussed Stanley Johnson's knighthood, but two people left that meeting with two very different interpretations of what was promised. Rishi Sunak is adamant that he said, "I won't do a deal, I won't do a promise, I won't make any sort of bending of the rules," is what he came out and publicly said today. But Johnson was left with the impression that his list was going to go through with those MPs' names on it. Now, is there a conspiracy here, or is it cock-up? Is it probably a bit of both? I suspect so. What is clear is Downing Street did not want 3 by-elections this week announced that will come probably at the end of July. That is what they were seeking to avoid. However, that's what they've now got. Now, Johnson is raging. He feels like he's being betrayed. Nadine Dorries is equally publicly vocalising the betrayal narrative. She's gone on Talk TV tonight straight for, quote, the posh boys that she thinks has stitched her up. So there's a girl from Liverpool who was promised a peerage, has had that taken away because she was outspoken and had a big mouth. This is not going to... These people don't have anything to lose, really. They're not trying to hold their seats. They have very high-profile media sort of platforms now, and I can't see them going quietly into the night. So I think that's why we saw Sunak today come out and try and punch Boris on the nose quite hard, just to give a little message, which is, hang on, mate, look, I'm not gonna take this lying down. And it seems that Downing Street are going to fight fire with fire.
And just very briefly from you both before we move on, a YouGov poll found only a quarter of those asked want to see Boris Johnson return. He's obviously saying in the Express tomorrow, "I'll be back." Do you see that happening, Pippa?
Well, we're reporting tonight in The Guardian that Rishi Sunak would block his return to the Tory candidates list should he try and make a comeback this side of a general election. So in short, no, I don't see that happening anytime soon. But as we've all learned with Boris Johnson over very many years, is that you never say never.
Yeah, quite. Harry, briefly?
There's no return for Boris Johnson, and he knows that, and he's vocalised that to people many times, that until the fundamentals change, until the parliamentary makeup changes, there is no way back. And if Rishi Sunak wins the next election by hook or by crook, it's his party for 5 years. If he loses, does Boris Johnson really want to come back and be leader of the opposition? But, 10 years' time, who knows?
Yeah, quite. Who knows? Let's get on to the front page of your paper, Pippa, The Guardian. Really interesting and really controversial story about a woman who's been jailed for taking abortion pills after the legal cut-off limit. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, so in England, Wales and Scotland, most abortions legally have to take place before 24 weeks. Many of them, of course, take place way before that, in the very first few weeks of pregnancy. And after 24 weeks, in some limited circumstances, for example, if a woman's life is in danger as a result of a pregnancy, or if there's no prospect of the baby surviving, there are certain medical situations where doctors can make a judgment that actually it's in both their best interests for the pregnancy not to proceed. But what's happened here is that a mother of three received what became known as pills by post during the pandemic for early stage abortions pre-10 weeks. It was introduced for unwanted pregnancies after remote consultation, because obviously it was harder for women to get out to see their doctor or to these clinics. And she apparently, when she applied for these drugs, she had claimed that she was below 10 weeks. And actually, by the time she took them, she was about 7 or 8 months pregnant, which is way beyond the cutoff period. And as a result, she pleaded guilty, but she has been sentenced and will spend half of her sentence, so about just over a year, in custody, and the other half on licence. And this is despite the fact that in the various expert groups, so the Royal College of Obstetricians and various other pregnancy, the Royal College of Midwives, various other experts groups had written a letter, signed a mitigation plea to the judge in an attempt to sort of warn him or warn the judge that they potentially were setting out a dangerous precedent, putting women off going for support and help should they need it later in pregnancy. Yeah. And that, of course, this woman clearly was in a very fragile emotional state, and is prison the best place for a mother of three that's obviously been through very difficult circumstances. So, this is a story which will prompt, no doubt, strong views on either side of the abortion debate. I mean, it must be reminded that the vast majority of people in this country support abortion. I think people get queasier the later it happens. And cases like this will inevitably spark debate about what the right limits are, and whether women should be punished, regardless of the reasoning behind it, for taking action later on in pregnancy, as this woman did.
OK, Pippa, a very sad story on many levels. Thank you both so much. We're just going to cut to a short break and give you a little bit of a breather. Coming up, we'll have more from the papers, including this story on the front page of tomorrow's FT. Their headline, Berlusconi dies at 86, leaving big questions for Meloni's right-wing government. We'll have more on that coming up. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. And with me is Pippa Crerar, political editor at The Guardian, and Harry Cole, political editor at The Sun. Let's kick off with you, if I may, Harry. An article in your paper tomorrow about Sadiq Khan's office banning the reference to men and women. What's going on?
You might wonder whether Sadiq Khan would spend most of his time tackling the deep problems at the Met, or perhaps storing knife crime in the capital, or congestion, the fact you can't really get around, the tube's overheating today. But no, the Sun have got hold of his style guide, so to speak, where staff at City Hall have been told not to say men and women, because apparently that's offensive. I'm not quite sure who to. Not to say EU migrants, to say foreign, let's say Londoners from Europe, and various other things on this list that go through that reads like a sort of almost like a Private Eye spoof of someone desperately trying to be ultra woke and hip and right on, but actually just sounding a little bit mad.
And maybe a bit confusing for many people. Pippa, the Financial Times, leading with a tribute to Berlusconi, of course, who's died at the age of 86, and questions about what that could mean for Giorgia Meloni's coalition.
Yeah, I mean, Silvio Berlusconi seems to be around forever, doesn't he? I remember there's pictures of him and Tony Blair meeting on various trips to Tuscany. A long and controversial career that's ranged, as FT says, from billionaire media magnate to trailblazing populist. And he was on and off leader of Italy for over a decade in total, which was marked, of course, by that criminal investigation into his business affairs, and indeed the sex scandals. Who can forget the Bunga Bunga parties? But he was always active, even towards the end of his life, in Italian politics, and he played a leading role in the crisis that actually brought down Mario Draghi's government last year and helped to form Giorgia Meloni's ruling coalition. And because of that key role that he played at that point, questions have been asked about the division of power between Meloni's right-wing coalition now and the future of his Forza Italia party, which doesn't have a clear successor. So, remained an instrumental and influential figure in Italian and European politics, despite his advancing years, and despite the fact he was no longer in power himself. He was very much somebody who was sitting there pulling the strings. So, a major change in Italian politics tonight with the death of Silvio Berlusconi.